All right. Well, here we go. The last class of the second book in the two-part series. First was Delivered Out of Empire. This one, Delivered into Covenant, Pivotal Moments in the Book of Exodus, Part 2 by Walter Brueggemann. You know by now how it goes. He picks a verse that he designates as a pivotal moment or a crucial moment that of significance in the Book of Exodus, and that's what we talk about. This week, the final chapter, chapter 14, which is called The Arrival of Glory, Exodus chapter 40, verse 34, which reads, "Then the cloud covered the tent of the meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." Succinct and to the point. And here marks the conclusion of Exodus and the final triumph of Yahweh. Yahweh's arrival and display of glory in the tabernacle marks the culmination of the events which were set into motion when Yahweh intervened at the beginning of the music. This is like the coronation of a king the people expect to rule now, forever, and always, except, as we discussed last week, the future would remain fraught with danger and still more uncertainty. The unthinkable would happen multiple times. In centuries to follow, the glory of God would seemingly depart, and then return, and then depart. And here I'd like to read a passage from Brueggemann's book to describe the pattern that would repeat again and again in the life of Israel. And I honestly think that this pattern is quite familiar with all of us now at this point. I think that it will feel familiar. Quoting from the book, and this is from pages 151 and 152 of the digital version. I don't know what it is in your hard copies, but it goes, the priestly tradition would have us accept that the arrival of divine glory in the tabernacle is the permanent arrival of divine glory in the tabernacle that will be durable and uninterrupted. The same sense of durability is voiced in a different liturgical tradition in 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 12 through 13, where the temple is, quote, a place for you to dwell forever, the you being God there, being Yahweh. Back to the quote. But of course, the vexed historical experience of Israel did not allow for such a sustained, uninterrupted divine presence. Already in 1 Samuel chapter 4, the Ark of the Covenant, icon of the divine presence, was taken to be an assurance of Israel's military success, except that Israel suffered a massive defeat, so massive that the Ark was captured and Yahweh was humiliated. That humiliating defeat led to the sad summary judgment from 1 Samuel chapter 4, verses 21 through 22. She named the child Ichabod, meaning the glory has departed from Israel because the Ark of God had been captured and because of her father-in-law and her husband. She said, the glory has been departed from Israel, for the Ark of God has been captured. So go on with the quote. The glory can and did depart. The name Ichabod is literally, where is glory? And the clear response is implied, not here. The word rendered departed, moreover, is in fact gone into exile, that is displaced. To be sure, in 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 5, Yahweh has returned to power and will assert dominance over the Philistine gods, enough so that the Philistines can say in their awe before Yahweh, quote, so you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice and ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand on you and your gods in your land. Yahweh makes a powerful return, but the wound of glory departed lingers. That memory of Israel contradicts the priestly claim of permanent divine presence as glory. The tradition clearly knows about divine absence and the departure of glory. Just a long way of saying and making the point that through the Bible, you see the glory of God. Yahweh arrives, seemingly for keeps, as in today's passage, and then it departs as a result of sin and tragedy, usually, or at least there's multiple explanations sometimes given by the people as they grapple with the why as to why it would seem times they fall in hard times. But then the glory of the Lord returns. Yahweh seems to reassert control and sovereignty, and then the patterns repeat through history. And through the millennia, the Israelites would reenact and relive the story of the Exodus. In the midst of all the flux, the good times and the bad, they would reenact this story that we have been considering for a year now. And you likely well know about the ways that they've remembered these stories through their traditions. The Jewish tradition of Passover, whereby Jews remembered their salvation and flight from empire. They would remember the glory of Yahweh as represented today in this line, today's pivotal text from Exodus 40, and bring the reality of that God near to them by way of prescribed ritual and by trying to maintain holy environments for Yahweh to dwell. We've been talking about those in the chapters leading up to today's chapter, the construction of the tabernacle, but then later those holy environments will be the temples, the first one, and then the second one, and even a synagogue would have to do it in a pinch going forward. But through it all, they would maintain this conviction. God is sovereign, and God's glory is not impugned. And this is true even when God's glory seems to have waned in the wake of chaos and violence brought about by humanity's collective sin. By reenacting the practices and rituals described in Exodus, the God who put the imperial might of Pharaoh back into its place visits upon the people again, still victorious. And you're going to notice many similar themes to today's lesson compared to last week's lesson, where we talked about the ways our rituals and practices bring our hopes for the future into our present. And so last week I used as an example how Christmas marks something that we believe happened in history, the coming and arrival of Jesus. Also notes the arrival of Jesus, the Spirit of God and Jesus into our community around the time of Christmas, or at least acknowledging it in a more obvious way that God has drawn near. But also we look into a future where the work of Jesus is actualized on Christmas, where not only has Emmanuel come, but Emmanuel has come to captive Israel and has done it. And all of that feels more, it has more substance to it, that the promises ring more true. We feel them in our spirits around times like Christmas. Well, today's chapter is talking about how even though the glory of God would seem to depart throughout the course of Israel's history and then come back, they would maintain rituals that would help them bring them back to this moment in their history where God's glory resided in the midst of the people seemingly forever. Brueggemann rightly likens the Christian traditions and theologies about our crucified God to the Yahweh, whose glory seems to depart. If ever God's glory seemed diminished and thwarted, it was when Jesus looked to the sky and cried out the words of the psalmist, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is the return of old Ichabod. Where is the glory? Not here. Except on Easter, we remember the triumph of God's glory as witnessed in the resurrection of the very one who previously lamented God's absence. God's glory is revealed by the works, wisdom, and miracles of Jesus. That glory seemed to depart when Jesus was killed. But then the glory returned in force when Jesus was resurrected. In fact, the disciples would discover that the glory of God as revealed in Jesus Christ would remain with them forever, except persecution, martyrs, history, ups and downs, patterns, again, they repeat. But just as the Israelites reenacted the priestly traditions to remind them that the God of Exodus could still draw near, the glory of the God that was able to liberate the people and put Pharaoh back in its place, that God can still draw near. And so too have Christians kept practices and rituals to remind us of this: Easter, Christmas, communion, baptism, Sunday worship even, etc. And our traditions meant to reveal to us the very real presence of God and God's glory fill a similar function as the traditions meant to help Israel realize the real presence of God in the midst of exile. Quoting Brueggemann again, the Christian gospel gives us crucified glory. This is not the glory of kings and empires. It is rather the glory of God that must appear in the wilderness, outside the zone of Pharaoh's domain. What Christians have had to face in the crucifixion of Jesus, the faith of Israel in the Old Testament already knew. It knew of Ichabod that glory departs. It knew through the imagination of Ezekiel that the glory of God will be exiled, that the God who got glory would lose glory and must again get glory in a new venue in the face of new adversaries. It is likely that our text in Exodus chapter 40 knows none of this or wants to acknowledge none of it, but the priests are knowing and wise. They themselves lived amid exile, They know about chaos and displacement. They know about loss of temple and city and divine glory. As a result of that knowing awareness, I hazard the judgment that their presentation of uninterrupted glory in chapter 40 is not at all an act of denial. It is rather an act of defiance. They will not give in to the dominance of empire that displaces or to the sadness of displacement in the free fall of abandonment. Such a refusal to give in to the rulers of this age amounts to a deep conviction about the God who has gotten glory over Pharaoh and who will again get glory in another coming victory over powerful adversaries. End quote. And a comparable Christian conviction may go like this. If I had to paraphrase it for myself as a Christian, I don't know how bad things may get or how much sin and deaths will seem to dominate in the future, but this much I know: he is risen. And because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Yearly Easter celebrations are reminders that the God who arrived in glory in Exodus 40, in a demonstration of victory over the Egyptian empire, also called Jesus back from the dead. And each year we make preparations for the arrival of God's glory as revealed by the resurrection. In so doing, we insist that the God whose glory seemed diminished when the Israelites were again dominated by empire, or when Jesus was killed by the Roman Empire on the cross, that God will still draw near in glory. And our liturgical lives continue to remind us of that. And they continue to remind us that ultimately God's glory remains. The final vision for humanity in Judaism and Christianity is one in which all the world has been transformed and persists in the light of God's glory, which shines out brightly forever and ever to light our way. This is expressed well in this passage from the book of Revelation, and I will conclude with this quote. Revelation 21:22 through 27. I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God is its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. The nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. Its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night. People will bring into it the glory and honor of the nations, but nothing unclean will enter it, nor anyone who practices abomination or falsehood, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. Before we move on to questions or comments, just to let you know, we will be convening next Thursday. Now, we don't have the book. And so before that class, read nothing. You come ready for prayer and discussion about our next direction. And what I'm thinking, just to let you in on what I'm thinking, I might suggest, is that we order enough Advent devotionals for all of us, and then take a break, and then at Advent pick things up. But we can talk more about that next week. In the meantime, I'll stop share and ask that if you like, unmute and let's discuss this final chapter. It was quite a lot to get our minds around, I think. I see nods. You're muted, Nancy.
I know.
There you go.
So as I was reading this, I thought, what is glory anyway? And then out fell from my book some notes that I took months ago, I think, when the Israelites were just starting out their journey in the wilderness. And I wrote down manifestation of one's presence and power.
That's right.
Pharaoh's glory was demonstrated by conquest, building projects. Yahweh's glory was revealed in wilderness, revealed by such things as supplying these basic necessities like bread and water and so on. But anyway, so I guess I've forgotten that. Luckily, I wrote that down.
Yeah.
But anyway, what is the glory? What I mean, they talk. This whole chapter is about glory.
One thing that's tricky about this, and this was talked about, but probably not enough, and I haven't brought it up since probably that whatever week it was you took those notes. But this is also true into the time of Jesus too. So what I'm about to share is a worldview that people in the biblical world share that is kind of weird to us. Is basically this: you have things like honor or glory in finite amounts in a community. So it isn't as if the Pharaoh and Moses could have equal shares. If Pharaoh has the lion's share, then Moses is lacking. And if Pharaoh's gods have the lion's share of glory, manifest through the temples built in the honor of the gods, manifest in the rites and the rituals, all of these things meant to reflect and reveal to the people the glory of, say, the Egyptian gods. Well, if they have all of it and they use that power and might and majesty to dominate and get more of it, rob it, take it from the other nations. That's what's playing on in that passage of Revelation where the nations bring their own glory. And as unlike the world as it was, where as they divulge their glory, they lose it. In the realm of God, no one really loses it. As they give it, we just get more together. It's kind of think of the lesson of the book of Acts. As we share our time, our resources, we end up with more together. But anyway, I diverge. But the point I'm trying to make is something like glory, like say the Pharaoh has or Yahweh has, is in finite amount. That's the way they thought of it. So this idea, so these competitions between the deities were very important because but at the end of the day, one of them was going to end up with the lion's share of the glory, and with the glory went the resources, went the ability to procure lands and many other things like that. And so one of the disconnects in this and what we're missing in this discussion about where glory goes and how it manifests is that this was all evidence to the people of whose God was bigger and who was winning, and over and against others. And so in the point that Brueggemann is wanting to make is 2 points. One is that in the book of Exodus in the 40th chapter, we have an example of where God's glory manifests now that they've made the temple, now that they've done everything. The people have a visual representation and a real presence of the God who busted them out of Egypt, who now has Pharaoh's glory, has taken the glory out of Egypt and has all of it as the supreme deity, the one God, the true God. And in Exodus chapter 40, this is talked about as if this is going to be the situation now and forever going forward. The glory has arrived. We've had the penultimate moment. Roll the credits. Israel wins the day because Yahweh is on their side. But what we know happens, and what the people even reading this hundreds of years would know, the people who compiled the Torah in the form we have it, that the glory did not remain. So why would they frame it this way if they know that it would deny the reality around them? Why wouldn't they rethink it? Well, the second point Brigham is wanting to make is not only how do I say this? The people, by enacting these rites and rituals as we're prescribing, or going through the Exodus chapter 40 and remembering that story as part of, and going through the same rituals as prescribed in the chapters leading up to that penultimate moment, they're insisting in defiance of the reality that the glory of the God of all will win out in the end. And whether they're in exile or fast forward some centuries later, whether you're talking Christian communities who had borne witness to the glory of God diminished on the cross, but then the resurrection, the glory of God not only returned, but in a way that was far surpassing the glory that they had previously seen in Jesus before the resurrection. Whatever ebb and flow you're in, whether you're the glory departed time, times of national calamity, or whether you're in the glory very obvious, times are good and the presence of God is felt by all. You can hold on to these rituals and hold on to the promises and insist that God's glory, while it seems diminished, is still there, and that ultimately all will see it, which is why I concluded with that passage from Revelation, which envisions a time where not only does God have all of the glory, but there's enough glory to go around for everybody. And hypothetically, you could envision a world where Pharaoh enters that world and realizes that not only is his glory not diminished, but he shares in the light and the love and power and majesty of God. I don't know if this is making it more clear or less clear, but I have quizzical looks. So I'm thinking I'm making muddy in the waters more than I'm helping.
I would say the thing that I like best in this chapter is when it said, where is the glory? This is not here. But the literal translation was gone into exile.
Mm.
And I think that helps. When you say not here, you think just poof, gone.
Dissipate.
Yeah. But it's like with the Israelites, they went into Babylon, but yet eventually they started coming back. And so this says that, God's not just gone. He's just moved to a different location and he's coming back later from the exile.
You've given the missing link to what I was trying to say. In those times where God's glory has departed, it goes somewhere. And in that case, with the people, even in the exile. So if the people may have had the temple destroyed, in the midst of the exile, but they could find ways of remembering these rites and rituals as best as they could. And they would say the glory of God that resided forever, we thought, and that glory still is, and it's on our side. We just need to find ways of making that more real to us, that reality more real to us, which is why I spent so long talking about rites and rituals that we have as Christians that do the similar thing to us. So in the year 2020, the glory of the Lord departed. But on Christmas, we're like, no, it's here. We're in exile in a unique way. We're in Zoom, Easter on Zoom. Where's the glory? It feels empty. But you go through the ritual as best as you can, and that it finds you, and it's still with us. What you were saying gave me a better way of expressing what I was trying to say earlier through so many words. But I was also making a distinction between the way we view things now and in the ancient world that I'm not sure was helpful. Now we don't think of glory in finite terms. We don't think of like, if you behold the glory of an athlete and they're, it's a Tom Brady commercial and they're framing him in a way that brings out all of his best, as, worshipers will do of their God. That doesn't mean that there can't hypothetically be someone else that has the same amount or more. That's no threat to Tom Brady. In the ancient world, if Tom Brady had it, someone else did. It's a finite thing. And it's a weird concept to get around, but when you realize that that's the way they're thinking, it makes a lot more sense of the way the tribal disputes would function, as seen as but also the parables of Jesus, as we're talking about talents and how it's like, why does there need to be 10 here, 3 here, 1 there? Well, in that world, that was the way they thought of blessing, God's blessing. And so that's what I was trying to say. But that's not really important to today's message so much as to say that in the times of exile, as you were saying, Sue, it's not that God is nowhere. God is somewhere with the people. That was very helpful.
I think of the song about this, a sweet, sweet spirit in this place. And I think nowadays in our world, when we think of God in the world, we think of the spirit rather than a pillar of cloud or fire. We think of the spirit. And so, very, very much alive in this world today.
The spirit, the visitation of the flames, the tongues of flames, meant to bring us back to those pictures where the God manifested in fire in the past. But in the book of Acts, in the Christian communities, it was in this unique way that was shared and for all. So it was like helping the people think of like, hey, we don't need to think of all of our glory, resources, might, efforts, all of it. We don't need to think of it in finite terms. We can the parable of like the loaves and 2 fishes, all about breaking people out of that mindset where there's a very limited amount of resources. The parables about our role in society are also about that, where Jesus was trying to get the people to see, like, just because you give the head position of the table to so-and-so doesn't mean that you are less. In fact, the last will be first in the realm. And the first will be last. Those who keep insisting on hoarding the glory, well, they realize they'll not only lose it, but they don't need to. They had enough in the first place. If they could just, give the higher place of honor to another guest, says Jesus in the parable. All of it was about to address the mindset of his time. We don't have that. We don't think that way anymore. We don't think that there's a fight. Now, celebrities do get jealous, and athletes and everything, over attention, but no one really thinks that one person's ascension necessarily means the descent of other members of a community. It's a weird way to think, but that's the way they thought. I guess it wasn't weird for them. I learned that in my Bible classes back in seminary.
I'm trying to figure out, how do you determine when the glory is here and when it isn't? How do you, is it like, it almost sounds like if the gross national product is up, then we have glory.
Oh, yeah.
But you, no, you can't define it that way, but I just have trouble with, how do you know when it's here and when it isn't?
I was talking about it in those terms because that is the way that ancient Israel saw, and actually, like, Calvinists in North America around, the Puritans, that is the way they saw it too. I don't share that theology. I don't think that wealth is evidence. I think there's plenty of biblical text to point us into the opposite direction. There's also biblical texts that reinforce that opinion too. So you kind of have both. But so I was using that. I don't mean to make it not even only that, but that at all, that our possessions as evidence of glory. The Israelites saw the things like the exile as definite evidence of God's not glory. But what they discovered, and the point of the lesson, was there was glory, the point that Sue was making. So yeah, what does glory mean today, I guess?
Yeah.
Back then, it was, who's Yahweh wins in battle. Yahweh brings food for the people. Yahweh does all the things that ancient expectations thought a God should be doing, but better than all of the others. And then they would begin to develop a theology that this is the only God, and this God is overall. That's another story. So what is glory today? That's a really good. And how do you know that you have it?
I think we have God's glory every time we see something done for another. The reaction of one person to another of showing God's grace, and whether it's giving them food, as with the pantry, or whether you just you hear somebody. We have this house here in New Augusta where we live, and we found out there were 2 couples living in the house, and they just got here from, I think, Guatemala. They don't speak English. And so when we've done the pantry, we sometimes take whatever's left over and just leave it on their front porch. I think that's an act that God would approve. And if he approves it, then I think that would be God's glory.
This has been the shift in theology in not Christian and Jewish communities as they've considered these texts, where they've known the theology that you pointed out, Janet, that does associate glory with like material goods is still with us. And I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's one of the things that Christians today need to help people see through. Help them through. There are good Christians who think this way. I'm not saying they're not Christians, but I think it's all. I find it. There are godly poor people, and there are terrible rich people. So obviously that can't be the only. And there are godly rich people, and there are terrible poor people. So, but there has been a shift. What you said, Sue, I think many would agree. I agree. When I see God glorified is when what I think of as God's love, which I think of as God's literal substance. When I see love in real time around me, I see God glorified. What you're doing is you're seeing signs of glory outside of the ritual. I don't think Brueggemann moved us past seeing God's glory in our modern rituals, such as Easter and Christmas. But I think one of the there's no surprise that you going to disciples churches your whole life, is our impulse is to want to see where God is moving outside of officially designated channels, which is
in every day to day, everything. What you do, what other people do for you, what anywhere.
yeah.
I was just talking to one of the people at Gleaners, and she was asking me if we needed a refrigerator. Well, the refrigerator picture that she had sent us was a regular, like, household refrigerator. So it had the freezer at the bottom, and that really isn't going to suit our needs. But when I told her what had happened to our refrigerator in our kitchen, she said, I've got some information I'm going to send you on a grant opportunity through Gleaners, which apparently could possibly get us what we need to replace it. Not immediately. I mean, the grant procedure isn't even open yet, but she's going to send me the information. And I mean, if we could get something like that, that to me is glory. And the fact that she was just, right on it to give me that information.
So the way that's perfect. So the way that works. So the Israelites, they were like, God showed glory over Pharaoh when God did this thing to break us out. And we remember that when we gather around Passover, when we do these other things that bring that moment in our history right into our present moment. And maybe we feel like life is doing pretty well right now. Maybe we're in exile, but we bring that in the moment. For us, you see the glory through the God's providence. It's not striking the rock for water in the desert, but it's, for us, it feels something in that direction, like this potential blessing, and then an actualized blessing. And then when we gather around the table on Sunday mornings and we break bread, and we're reminded that is pantomiming the way Jesus broke bread, one time 5 loaves that ended up feeding the multitude. It connects to the glory you saw in the story from your day to day with the refrigerator. And when you take communion, now you're thinking about God's abundance. And you may have had a week where there was little evidence of God's of abundance in God's creation. Maybe you had a series of financial calamities and other things, but then you break the bread, you remember that story, and you say, God is sovereign, and God's glory surrounds me, and God will be glorified in the ways that my needs are met going forward. And that's just in the defiance of a reality that is not yet what it should be when the realm of God comes in full. You see a little pocket of the realm when somebody makes a way for a refrigerator. And that's it. And that's just a silly, small thing. It's not silly, it's important. But
it's accumulation of the small things.
Yeah, that's it. We hashed this out. I confess this was a challenging chapter. But we hashed it out, and I feel like we've honored the meaning of the chapter, and it's been good for us too. Well, next week we'll come with no agenda for perhaps a short meeting or a long gabbing meeting. I don't know, to talk about our lives, but also to think about what direction we want to be. The things I want you to be thinking about is, what do we want to do with our time together, and what time works for you, but also consider what times might work for people who are working through the day. I realize that evenings won't work for everybody, and I prefer the middle of the day because I'm here in the office and I expect to be here anyway. But I do want to have the time that is best for the most people, so that I might, tell Jared and Amy Trulinger, or somebody who isn't able to come. We're going to have these offerings, and then they could come. So think about those things. I don't want to talk about it right now, get in the weeds, but think about that. And if you have an idea that's not the Advent devotional that we order from Chalice Press, I had that idea because I think the Lent devotion went well. It was nice to have a little breather, and it was not watered down. It was rich time. We had good discussions. So that makes me want to consider doing that through the season of Advent. But if not, and that means we could take a pause through the back half of October into November. But if you have another idea, I'm open and receptive to all of them. We can write them down and even think beyond Advent to the next thing. But I'm wanting this to become something more than it. We've done this. This was a necessity of the pandemic, and we've had a wild ride, haven't we? I mean, here we are, two years later of doing this, with mostly the same group. Actually, basically, I think the same group. But I would like this to become something that is more than more.
Right.
And I am over right now. I'll conclude with this. I chose these two books because I've long loved and appreciated Walter Brueggemann's biblical analysis. This book sold itself by the publisher as being like really layperson friendly and user friendly. I feel like they did try to adapt it in that way, but just left the process incomplete. I felt that there was a lot that was very nerdy in the weeds Bible scholar stuff that is interesting to some, but not to everybody. And it's not really important to everybody all the time either. I felt that there was a lot of that in there. And then there would be
there's the Daily Bread booklets out in the sanctuary or in the narthex as well that, we could just talk on. You'd have 7 days to think about it, and each one could bring something that was something that impressed them or was value to them out of that book as well.
Good. They'll think of
want to do that until Advent, because Advent is 6 weeks away probably.
Good point. Well, bring all these ideas next week.
I just wanted to say before we go that I will not be here in church this Sunday. My son and daughter-in-law are going to be here for a very short visit. And so I want to spend as much time with them as possible.
Okay. Yeah, I understand. Well, if you can see if you can bring them, but I understand the family dynamics.
Well, I thought about that too, but that's probably not going to happen.
Whatever makes your time with your son and daughter-in-law the best, do that.
Right.
That's beyond, that has more value than about anything, is being close to the people you love.
Yeah.
I was about to say more value than church. I don't believe that. I think they're different, but anyway.
They're different. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're both valid.
Yep. They're both. You got it. That's what I was trying to say. All right. Well, I will, I'm going to go to see Barbara Moore now. Prayers for her family. You may see an email in the next day or two letting us know what's going on, what's happening. So I already know that they're not doing the funeral at the church. They're wanting to do it where her husband's had been, which was Oak Chapel, Oak something cemetery. It's like a funeral home and funeral plot at the same time. So I'm just saying it to some of you because you would want to know, what are we going to do at Northwood to be host to? We're not going to need to do that. We're not going to be here at the church. So I'll keep you posted. And so until next week.
Okay.
Got.
Wow.
Bye-bye.